So today, churches everywhere have celebrated Pentecost Sunday, and Torah observant believers celebrated Shavuot. They're the same thing. It just so happened that this year they fell on the same day. Usually they don't. Pentecost Sunday follows Easter. It does not follow the biblical calendar. But Shavuot follows the biblical calendar. And so they usually don't line up. Anyway, I thought that it would be good to just share a few things about Shavuot, Pentecost Sunday, maybe help people understand better that when it comes to the church and Torah observant, we're not that far apart. We're celebrating a lot of the same things. Sometimes it's the wrong day, but that gap is not as big as a lot of people think it is. There's actually a very interesting parallel between Exodus 20 and Acts 2. See, a lot of people are talking about the day of Pentecost, and they only focus on when the Holy Ghost fell, the whole Acts 2:38 and everything. But in Acts 2, it literally says, first verse, when the day of Pentecost had fully come. Now, that was not some kind of prophetic statement. They were not naming the day before it happened. What was happening there is that those disciples, those believers, they were already observing that biblical feast of Shavuot. It's the feast that's described in Leviticus 23, verses 15 through 22. It's actually, at that point, it was the feast that commemorates Exodus 20, where Yehovah gave us the 10 Commandments. Now, this whole Pentecost thing, when the Holy Ghost fell, that came about 1400 to 1500 years later. And so, 1500-ish years after, the disciples find themselves gathered to keep that feast day. And boy, were they in for a ride. They were there to keep Shavuot. They didn't know that there was going to be a whole new layer to it. So, see, that feast was already established. And Jesus, as well as the disciples and all the believers, they were keeping that day. They were keeping Shavuot. They were keeping that day to remember Exodus 20, when we were given the 10 Commandments. Now, today, we keep Shavuot to commemorate two different events. And the first one is, like I said, when Yehovah gave us the 10 Commandments. The second one is when Yehovah gave us His Spirit. And a lot of people don't realize that those occurred on the same day. They're not that far apart. They're not that big of a difference. See, in Acts, Jesus has just ascended, and He had become that sacrificial lamb. He ended the requirement for animal sacrifice, the shedding of blood to atone for sin. So this has happened, and the disciples and the other believers, Mary was there. They were in this room praying. They call it the upper room. Now, when the Holy Ghost fell on all those people, they weren't in the upper room. They were on Solomon's porch. But that's another lesson for another day. All of this was marking a time of transition and growth. So now we celebrate both these days at the same time to remember them, because these are very important times in our history. The first one is the time when Yehovah gave his law, which was the Ten Commandments. The second one was when Yehovah gave us his Spirit, and he wrote his law on our hearts. See, we're not that far apart. But there's another connection there that I find very interesting, and I just wanted to mention it. And it makes the 2 days it's just very interesting to see this connection. See, when Yehovah descended onto Mount Sinai, he did it. It says that he descended in fire in Exodus 19:18. Now, we go to Acts on the day of Pentecost, and it says Jehovah's Spirit appeared as a flame of fire over the heads of the disciples and those who were filled with his Spirit. And that was in like Acts 2:3, I believe. So see, God gave us signs like this so that we could see that he absolutely had his hand in both. He wants us to see that whether you're Torah observant or you're, I don't know, Christian, there's not that much difference between us. We're worshiping the same God most of the time. There's some churches that do have that other spirit that Paul warned us of, but we're not talking about that. We're worshiping the same God, and we're looking at a lot of the same days. It's just, unfortunately, sometimes they're using the wrong calendar. The biblical calendar is really what we should be using, because it gives us the days as it is written, and we have to pay attention to as it is written. That's why people get in trouble with this whole Sabbath thing, because they only see, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. They don't look at the rest of it that says you don't do any work, you don't cause anyone else to work. And then they want to say every day is a Sabbath for me. Well, then you never work? Really? So it's things like that. We're close. We're so close to coming together. And we've got to find these little points where we can meet and agree on things. And I really believe that when we start meeting and agreeing and not being so contentious with each other, when we can love each other and find those points that we agree on and meet there, God's going to fill in the rest. And he's going to give revelations, and he's going to speak to people, and he's going to show us how to close that gap until we're all walking as he walked. Pray about it. I'm not asking you to jump on anything today. I'm not trying to convert you. I'm not trying to convince you. I just want you to pray about it and see what your God has to say.